Tires screeched. A black SUV lunged forward, only to be forced to a halt inches away. Out of nowhere, a black female cop threw herself into the vehicle's path, fists clenched, chest heaving with sweat. Gasps erupted, officers scattered, some drawing weapons, others frozen in disbelief. She slammed a folder onto the hood, papers exploding into the air like shrapnel. The chief inside the car stared in shock, his face draining of color. What could drive her to risk her badge, her life, in front of the entire unit? And what explosive truth was hidden in those trembling pages? If you want to know what happens next, stay with me until the end of the video. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button on Justice Voice and turn on the notification bell. That way, every thrilling and surprising story will always reach you. The morning came on heavy, like a hand pressed over the mouth of the city. Heat rose from the concrete courtyard behind the Justice Center in Cleveland, turning the air into a slow river that clung to skin and uniform alike. In that tight rectangle of shade and sunlight, men and women in blue stood in ordered rows, caps straight, backs stiff, eyes forward. Nobody talked if they could help it. Boots creaked, radios hissed soft as bees, and somewhere, far above, a gull cried as if it had taken a wrong turn at the edge of Lake Erie and couldn't find its way back. The convoy waited, engines ticking a steady heartbeat. 4 sedans, a van, and at the head a black SUV so clean the glass looked like pooled ink. It sat poised, tucked against the loading ramp, as if it were a resting animal that might spring. The driver kept his hands light on the wheel. The air conditioner murmured, and the smell of new leather drifted out each time the doors opened and closed. People said Cleveland summers weren't what they used to be. Maybe that was true. The old-timers on front porches knew something about how the lake used to cool the afternoons, how a breeze could lift the sweat from the back of your neck and make you believe in mercy again. But not that morning. That morning, the humidity made a collar feel like a rope. That morning, the patience of the place, its factories stitched along the flats, its churches and corner bars and brick row houses was stretched thin as wire. The chief was coming down, and it changed the temperature of everything. They had called it a scheduled inspection, routine and brief. The words sound good when you say them fast, routine, brief. But nobody moved like this for routine. Nobody polished chrome like this for brief. Officers stood double file. A lieutenant ran a cloth over the mirror of the SUV one last time, though there wasn't a fingerprint on it. The courtyard had been cleared of stragglers and scatter. If you didn't know better, you might think the building had been scrubbed of history for the morning, leaving only cement, glass, and the promise of more of the same. At the loading door, a pair of officers stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the corridor inside. The light there was fluorescent, pale, and buzzing. Deeper in, an elevator groaned and opened, and a group of aides stepped out like a flock of quick little birds, carrying clipboards and a briefcase, the sort of case that always seemed heavier than it looked. They walked toward the SUV, careful not to make eye contact with anyone who wasn't supposed to be seen. People always had a way of standing a little taller when Chief Harold Whitman appeared. He didn't tower, he didn't shout, he didn't need to. He wore the quiet like an ironed shirt, the kind of man who could pass through a room and make furniture straighten itself. His white hair was trimmed close, his tie exactly where it should be, his cap balanced by a hand that practiced that grip in mornings like this, years after year, city after city. If the badge had a way of bending men, time had bent him into something elegant and hard. They were waiting for him now, and the minutes stretched. Steam rose faintly from a manhole near the fence. On the far side of the courtyard, a row of poplars stood straight as soldiers, their leaves still. There was no breeze. There was no bird now. There was only the long hush before movement. Danielle Carter felt the hush more than she heard it. The sound that bothered her wasn't in the courtyard. It was behind her ribs, a nickel's worth of rattle that would not quiet down. She stood off to the side, near a metal door scarred with old scrapes, the kind of door that always sticks when you try to push it open quietly. Her uniform clung to her back. Sweat darkened the edge of her collar. She had tied her hair tighter than usual that morning, like a promise to herself. She kept her eyes on the ground and breathed through her mouth, slow and steady, counting to 4, then to 8, the way the academy had taught them when nerves made hands shake. Her hands did not shake, not now. They had shaken 2 nights ago, when she printed the last page in the dim light of her kitchen and saw the numbers line up like a row of church pews, all leading to the same altar. They had shaken when she taped the envelopes and slid copies in places she alone knew. They had shaken when she knelt beside her father's recliner and tucked a blanket around his shoulders, because he had forgotten again how the evening could feel cold, even in August. Now, in the courtyard, she let her hands rest against the folder she held tight against her side. The cardboard was damp. The edges had gone soft from the press of her fingers. No one noticed her yet, not really. To them, she was another uniform in the heat, another pair of boots. The morning put a glaze on everything that wasn't the black SUV, and that was fine with her. She needed a few more breaths. She needed the small mercy of being ordinary for just a moment longer. Another minute passed. The corridor brightened. Shoes clicked. Chief Whitman stepped from the shade into the doorway, and a small current ran through the courtyard. Officers adjusted their caps by reflex, a quiet wave of hands lifting and falling. The black SUV's door opened on its own, as if the vehicle itself knew how to welcome a man of standing. The driver shifted, eyes forward. The aides hurried the last few paces. Someone said, "Sir," and that was all it took to break the spell of waiting. Danielle's heel lifted from the ground. One breath, a second. She could feel the paper edges against her forearm, as real as a blade. She could hear her father's voice from last night, soft and wandering, telling a story that didn't have an ending, a story about men who made promises when no one was listening. Her father, who had spent a life beside the blast furnaces and came home each night smelling of metal and coal and faith. A man whose memory had frayed but whose conscience, even now, tugged at hers when the night was quiet. The morning spread wide in front of her like a road that would not be there tomorrow. She stepped onto it. It was not a dramatic sprint. It was a walk that gathered purpose with each footfall, a path that ran straight from the scarred metal door to the black curve of the SUV's grille. An officer turned his head. The driver saw her and froze, hands gripping the wheel. The lieutenant stiffened, unsure if they had missed a cue. Danielle kept moving. The folder came up in her hand like a lantern in a tunnel. She could have waited. She could have asked for a meeting later, a room with a table and a pitcher of water and the polite fiction of civilized talk. She could have filed a memo built of careful sentences and safer nouns. But there are mornings that don't leave a person that kind of room. There are mornings when a city holds its breath and asks what you are made of. The chief reached the bottom step, and the light fell over him full on. Danielle stepped into that light. The heat rose, the radios hummed, and every eye in the courtyard settled on the space between the black SUV and the woman in blue who would not step aside. "Chief," she said, and her voice carried in the stillness like a bell struck once. Then the engine coughed, the driver's foot twitched, and everything that had been waiting, heat, fear, doubt, the hard weight of the folder in her hand, leaned toward the moment to see what she would do next. The tires squealed, a short, desperate shriek, and the SUV lurched forward half an inch before the brakes caught. The sound bit through the courtyard, sharp as a gunshot, and silence fell again, deeper than before. Danielle Carter did not move. Her boots stayed fixed to the pavement. Her chest lifted with breath, but her eyes never wavered. A ripple of shock traveled through the rows of uniforms, men and women who had never seen one of their own stand in the path of the chief's car. Some looked away, as if not seeing it might undo it. Others stared, as though this single defiance had cracked something inside them they didn't know could break. The driver, Tommy Greer, felt his hands sweat on the wheel. He glanced into the rearview mirror, hoping for a signal, any signal, but Harold Whitman gave none. The chief sat stone still in the back seat, a shadow framed by tinted glass, his profile sharp against the light. He didn't need to bark an order. His silence was command enough. The air thickened. Danielle raised her hand, not in salute, not in plea, but as a warning. In her other arm, pressed to her chest, the folder sagged from dampness. She could feel the pulse of the courtyard, dozens of eyes, the thrum of engines, the heat rising off the concrete. Her voice cut through it all. "No one leaves this yard," she said. It was not a shout. It was louder than that. It was the kind of voice that carried a decision, a voice that belonged more to the truth than to the person speaking. Some officers stiffened, others shuffled, uneasy. A lieutenant opened his mouth and then closed it again, like a man who has swallowed glass. Whitman moved at last. The door of the SUV clicked open, and the sound was like a lock turning. He stepped out slowly, adjusting his jacket, his cap, his cuffs. He carried himself like a man born to command, though his father had worked the docks same as many others. Years of authority had smoothed him into something harder than steel, something less forgiving than stone. His gaze found Danielle across the hood of the SUV, and the courtyard tightened around that line of sight. "Officer Carter," he said, each syllable precise. "Step aside." She shook her head. "Not today." Her words drew out a murmur from the ranks. The murmur carried fear, disbelief, and buried deep in the mix, a tremor of hope. Danielle let it wash over her. She knew what came next. She had rehearsed it in the dark hours before dawn, sitting at her kitchen table with her father asleep in the next room. The evidence had lived with her for months. Now it was time for it to breathe in the open. She dropped the folder. It hit the concrete with a slap that echoed in the heat. Papers burst free like startled birds, photographs curling in the sunlight, financial statements stamped and signed, transfer slips with numbers so large they seemed unreal. The wind, faint but present, scattered them across the boots of officers standing rigid. One page skittered beneath the SUV's tire. Another brushed against Whitman's polished shoe. Gasps rose. A sergeant bent to pick up a sheet and froze when he saw the header. The words "confidential transfer" glared back at him in black ink. Another page showed the blurry but undeniable image of a boy barely 17, dark hair, eyes closed on a slab in the county morgue. Someone whispered a name, the one everyone remembered from the harbor last year, the one that had gone quiet too quickly. Whitman's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're doing," he said. "I know exactly what I'm doing," Danielle replied. Her voice trembled, not from fear but from the weight of what she carried. She pointed at the papers. "You buried the truth. You let this city bleed so you could protect yourself." The courtyard swayed as if it had been struck. Officers exchanged looks. Some bent to read, others pretended not to see. Sweat dripped down temples, soaked into collars. A bird screamed from the rooftops above, and the sound carried like mockery. That was when the sirens wailed. They weren't the sharp shrieks of patrol cars chasing suspects. They were deeper, heavier, a rolling alarm that spoke of oversight, of consequence. From a side gate, 3 black sedans rolled in, lights spinning. Their doors opened in unison, and men and women in plain suits stepped out, badges flashing. The Internal Affairs unit had arrived, and at their head was Maya Alvarez. Maya moved with purpose, her heels clicking against the pavement. She was taller than Danielle remembered, or maybe it was just the authority she wore now. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes unreadable behind rimless glasses. She glanced once at Danielle, once at Whitman, and then crouched to pick up a page from the ground. She read, her face giving nothing away, and then she looked at Danielle again. "Officer Carter," she said evenly, "explain yourself." Danielle's heart pounded, but she kept her chin high. "You have the evidence in your hands. The chief has been shielding a network of illegal payouts, and a boy died because of it. I couldn't stay silent." A wave passed through the gathered crowd. Words like illegal and died and chief crackled like sparks. Whitman's face hardened into stone. "You're finished," he said softly, only loud enough for Danielle and Maya to hear. "Do you think they'll follow you over me? Do you think this city wants scandal? You're one uniform. I am the department." Danielle swallowed, then turned her gaze to Maya. "Then let the investigation prove me wrong. Open the files, follow the money, talk to the families who never got answers." For a moment, it seemed the courtyard itself held its breath. Officers shifted, caught between loyalty and conscience. The sun beat down, punishing, relentless. A bead of sweat rolled from Whitman's temple down his cheek, but he didn't move to wipe it. He simply stood, waiting to see whether power or truth would rule the day. Maya's silence was its own drama. She scanned the courtyard, the officers, the faces tense with fear. Then she gave a single nod. "We'll see this through," she said. The spell broke. Radios crackled. Internal Affairs agents fanned out, collecting papers, photographing the scene, securing the evidence. The ordinary rhythm of procedure reasserted itself, but under it ran a current of something new, something dangerous. The courtyard was no longer just a place of order. It had become an open wound. Whitman stepped back toward his SUV, his eyes never leaving Danielle. His voice, low but sharp, cut across the air. "You've made enemies you can't imagine." Danielle stood straighter. though her throat burned and her knees threatened to shake. She thought of her father, of the way his hand had trembled as he tried to remember a name that wouldn't come. She thought of the boy in the morgue photograph, a life stopped short. She thought of the city that had raised her, tired and proud, waiting for someone to choose it over themselves. "I'm not afraid of the truth," she said. And for the first time that morning, some of the officers around her believed her. The courtyard had cracked open, and it would not close again. Internal Affairs collected Danielle's papers, slipping them into plastic sleeves, while the line of officers shifted uneasily in the heat. Chief Whitman stood like stone beside the black SUV, his silence heavier than any order. When Maya Alvarez, head of Internal Affairs, signaled for Danielle to follow her inside, every eye in the yard burned with the same question: was this the start of justice or the end of a career? Inside, fluorescent light replaced the Sunday. Sergeant Raymond Brooks, a veteran with tired eyes, caught Danielle's arm. "You make copies?" he murmured. She nodded. Relief flickered across his face. "Good. Folks who don't make copies end up as footnotes." He walked with her down the corridor, his presence a shield against the eyes that followed. The conference room had been stripped of comfort, just a table, 2 chairs, and a camera with its red light blinking. Maya was precise, her voice flat with procedure. "Officer Danielle Carter, badge number 3172, she began. The questioning rolled forward. How had she discovered the fund? Why had she waited? Who else knew? Danielle laid it out carefully: the Shell charities, the unexplained transfers, the boy by the harbor whose file had been rewritten until it was almost meaningless. "Did you fear for your safety?" Maya asked at one point. "Yes," Danielle admitted, "and not just mine." Breaks came rarely. In one, Brooks led her to a bench. He spoke in low tones, warning that the fight ahead would not be straight lines but fog and shadows. A young reporter, Elliot Barnes, intercepted them, hungry for a quote. Danielle refused, though part of her knew the press might one day be the only force strong enough to carry her story. By early afternoon, Whitman himself walked into the room, flanked by 2 assistant chiefs. His presence bent the air. He let his deputies ask the cutting questions. Did Danielle understand the damage of speculation, the unreliability of context, the risk of tarnishing the department's name? Danielle answered with steady calm. "I know how a boy looks on a slab. I know what those numbers mean." Finally, Whitman spoke. "You could have come to me," he said smoothly. "Instead, you chose a performance." "I tried," Danielle replied, 3 times. Each time I was told to be careful what I said if I wanted a career. The exchange settled over the room like a drawn blade. Maya held her ground, reminding the chief that Internal Affairs would require his office's full cooperation. Whitman promised it, his eyes never leaving Danielle. "Anything you need," he said. "We will clear this up quickly and publicly." When it ended, Whitman ordered Danielle to administrative duty pending review. It was suspension by another name, but Danielle met his gaze without flinching. "I'll keep telling the truth from there too," she said. That evening at home, she found her father sitting at the kitchen table, confused about a lunch pail he hadn't used in decades. She made him a sandwich, listening as he rambled through half-remembered stories. In his broken way, he gave her the strength she needed. "Don't let them make you forget why you started." Later, as the sun fell, an envelope slid under her apartment door. Inside was a photocopied bank record with a single line highlighted an error in a transfer routed through Harbor Trust, a small bank near the shipping docks. Someone had left her a trail. Moments after, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Be careful who you trust inside." Danielle locked the chain on her door, wrote Harbor Trust on a scrap of paper, and stuck it to the fridge. The city outside hummed on as if nothing had changed, but she knew better. The fight had only shifted ground. Tomorrow she would return to duty, pushed to the margins. But tonight she carried one clear truth into sleep. She was no longer standing alone. The morning after felt different, as though the whole city had shifted half an inch in the night. Danielle Carter woke to the sound of her father humming tunelessly in the kitchen, the old radio crackling out a gospel hymn. For one blissful moment she almost forgot what had happened the day before. Then her eyes found the envelope still pinned to the fridge, Harbor Trust scrawled across the slip of paper in her own handwriting, and the weight of the fight came back like a hand pressing on her chest. Administrative duty meant she would spend her days at a desk, pushing paper, stripped of patrols or investigations. It was meant to silence her, or at least keep her where she could be watched. Still, she dressed in uniform and kissed her father's cheek before heading out. At the Justice Center, the whispers had already spread. Officers she'd worked alongside for years avoided her eyes, as though even glancing her way might be contagious. A few nodded, quick and subtle, but most simply looked past her. Brooks found her in the lobby, sipping bitter coffee from a foam cup. "You're in records today," he said. "Safe place, if such a thing exists here." She managed to smile. "And you?" Still pretending retirement sounds boring, he grunted. Then softer, "Keep your ears open. Paper tells stories when you let it." The records floor was a maze of filing cabinets, humming printers, and weary clerks. Danielle settled at a corner desk with a stack of case files that smelled of dust and ink. She should have been sorting arrest reports, but her mind kept circling back to the banknote. Harbor Trust. Why leave her that clue? Why trust her with it instead of Maya or the press? By noon, she couldn't take the silence anymore. She slipped into the stairwell, phone in hand, and called Maya. The line clicked, her voice crisp as ever. "You're not supposed to be digging outside your assignment," Maya said when Danielle mentioned the bank. "I didn't dig. It found me. That doesn't mean it's clean." "Maya," Danielle pressed, "someone wanted me to see this. Harbor Trust. If money moved through there, then I'll follow it through proper channels," Maya cut in. "Your job is to stay visible, stay steady, and not give them a reason to bury you deeper." The call ended with a click. Danielle leaned against the cool cinder block wall, staring at the stairwell door. Stay steady, easy for someone whose position wasn't hanging by a thread. That night, unable to let it go, she drove to the harbor. The air smelled of rust and lake water, gulls circling above the dark warehouses. Harbor Trust sat on a corner, a squat brick building with blinds drawn and a single flickering light above the ATM. Through the glass, she could see the teller counters, neat as a row of teeth. Closed for the evening. A man leaned against the wall near the entrance, lighting a cigarette. When the flame flared, she recognized Elliot Barnes, the reporter. He grinned faintly when he saw her. "Didn't take you for a banker," he said. "You've been following me." No. "Following the story," he corrected. "And the story keeps leading to you." He blew smoke into the damp air. "You want to know something funny? I had a source whisper Harbor Trust to me last night, too. Seems someone out there is scattering breadcrumbs." Danielle stiffened. "And what do you plan to do with it?" "What I always do," Elliot said. "Print what people need to read. But maybe this time, I don't mind sharing a trail." He flicked the cigarette to the ground and ground it out. "Inside that bank, there's a ledger. Not the official one, the quiet one. Payments routed to accounts that belong to nobody, then disappear into city contracts. I don't know where it ends, but if you find that book, you'll be holding a match to a very long fuse." "Why tell me?" Danielle asked. "Because you still wear the badge," he said simply. "People trust you more than they'll ever trust me. But I get one thing you don't ink. So maybe we make a deal." "How well?" Before she could answer, a black sedan rolled past slowly, its windows tinted too dark for the street. Elliot cursed under his breath. "We're not the only ones curious tonight. Go home, officer. Keep your father safe. I'll nose around. You keep your shield clean. We'll compare notes if we're still breathing." He vanished into the alley before she could stop him. Danielle drove home with the image of that car in her mind, its headlights crawling like watchful eyes. When she parked outside her building, her father's window glowed warmly. She climbed the steps 2 at a time, relief flooding her as she heard his voice inside, singing off-key with the radio. But on the table, beneath the photograph of her parents' wedding day, lay another envelope, this one smaller, no writing on the front. Her pulse quickened as she tore it open. Inside was a single photograph, grainy, taken from a distance. It showed her walking into the Justice Center that morning. And beneath it, in block letters, "Stop or he suffers." Her father's recliner creaked as he shifted, unaware of the storm pressing against their door. Danielle crumpled the photo in her hand, every instinct screaming. They knew where she lived. They knew who mattered most. She moved to the window, checking the street below. Nothing but parked cars, empty sidewalks, and the steady hum of the city. Still, the message was clear. The fight had reached her home. Danielle pressed the paper flat again, her jaw tight. She whispered the words like a vow. Not tonight. Not ever. She tucked the photo into the same envelope as the Harbor Trust note, sealing them together. The path ahead was darker now, but she was already walking it. Morning brought a pale light and the clink of a spoon against a mug. Danielle woke to her father humming in the kitchen, that same old hymn he slipped into when the world felt bigger than he was. She stood in the doorway and watched him stir his coffee, careful and slow, as if the act itself could steady a day. The memory of last night's photograph burned in her pocket like a live ember, a grainy shot of her at the Justice Center, and 4 words cut from stone. Stop, or he suffers. She kept her voice even. How's breakfast, Daddy? Coffee's weak, he said, squinting into the cup, but it'll do. He looked up and smiled that shy smile she remembered from childhood, the one that showed the boy he had once been. Your mother said the lake would be pretty today. We'll tell her about it at dinner, Danielle said, and the old promise settled them both. On her way out, she slid the threatening photo into an envelope and tucked it under the tray in the freezer. Not a vault, but better than a drawer. She left a note for Nora, the home health aide. No visitors. Call me for anything. Then she headed to the Justice Center for another day of being parked in records, a bright uniform pushed into a dim corner. Word travels faster than paper. Eyes followed her as she crossed the lobby. Some were cautious, some hostile, a few warm and quick glances that said, "We see you," even if we can't say it out loud. Brooks met her by the elevator, his tie crooked, his coffee black enough to fix a tire. You look like you wrestled a bad dream, he said. Dream wrestled me, she answered. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. Somebody put a picture under my door. A threat, aimed at my father. His jaw moved once, slow and heavy. You tell Maya? I'm telling you first, she said. Then I'll tell her. Brooks nodded, not out of pride, but out of understanding. You did right. We'll take precautions. How? We make noise in the right places and keep quiet in the ones that matter. He put a hand on her shoulder, an old man's weight that somehow steadied her. Today, records is your shield. Use it. Stare at paper until paper stares back. Records smelled like toner and dust. Danielle settled at her corner desk with a stack of arrest reports and a sticky note that said alphabetize. She did it for a while, lining up small pieces of order. Around 10, she called Maya, told her about the photo, and listened to the silence on the other end collect itself. Text me a picture of it, Maya said at last. I'll have someone sweep your building and rotate the patrol route on your block. Don't open your door to anyone you don't know. Understood. And Danielle, I've been working the Harbor Trust angle since you called yesterday. There's a teller there who logged a correction on a transfer the night the boy at the harbor died. She never filed a complaint, said she didn't want trouble. Her name is Ruth Ann Calloway. If she'll talk, I want it on the record. How? You want me to go? I want you to go with me, Maya said. We meet there at noon. You're on administrative duty, not under house arrest. Come as a citizen who knows how to listen. The bank sat at the edge of the old warehouses, a squat brick building with a fresh coat of beige paint that couldn't hide its age. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. 4 teller windows, 2 occupied. A sign on the counter promised free calendars in December. A bowl offered mints that had sweated in their wrappers. Ruth Ann Calloway was in her 50s, hair pinned up with the kind of clips you buy in a 3-pack. She wore a navy cardigan and a smile that had learned how to keep customers calm when computers misbehaved. Maya introduced herself and showed her badge, quiet and professional. Danielle gave her name and held Ruth Ann's gaze with the respect one working woman gives another. Ruth Ann's hands went still on the counter. I know I should have said something, she murmured, even before questions were asked. I thought I was seeing ghosts in numbers. Ghosts leave footprints, Danielle said gently. Tell us what you saw. Ruth Ann glanced at the manager's door, closed but not soundproof. She lifted the small gate that separated customers from staff. Break room, she said. We'll talk over coffee, and if anyone asks, we'll say my sugar ran low. The break room was a narrow space with a humming fridge, a microwave that had seen better days, and a bulletin board crowded with bake sale flyers. Ruth Ann poured 3 cups, 2 black, one with powdered creamer that clouded the surface like lake fog. It was late, she began, standing because sitting felt too vulnerable. I'd stayed to balance the drawer. We had a transfer bounce. Not unusual. What was unusual was the number I was told to correct it to. Came in on a call after hours. No name, just a voice that knew a lot about a transaction the public shouldn't have known yet. Said a digit had been transposed in the routing. Told me the right one. Did you recognize the voice? Maya asked. Ruth Ann shook her head. Could have been anyone who spends half his life in meetings. Polite, tired, no accent you could hang a coat on. You logged it, Danielle said. I logged it, Ruth Ann confirmed, because I'm not going to be the person who doesn't log a thing that looks wrong. That's the rule I keep so I can sleep. Do you remember the corrected account? Maya kept her tone neutral. Or could you pull it? Ruth Ann's eyes flicked again to the manager's door. I can't just hand you records, but I can tell you something that isn't a record. She took a breath. The corrected transfer went to an account that gets small deposits every month from what looks like a community fund. Every couple months, a bigger withdrawal leaves, and it never leaves a trail we can see. The name on that account is a Shell Harbor Renewal Initiative. Sounds nice. Smells like paint. Feels like nothing. Maya nodded. We'll subpoena the documents. You'll want to do that soon, Ruth Ann said. Because last week, I saw a memo internal about archiving old community fund accounts to off-site storage. Sometimes off-site means off-map. Danielle leaned in. Ruth Ann, the night you got that call, do you remember the time? Ruth Ann closed her eyes and saw numbers. A little after 9. Enough past closing that I told myself I was doing a courtesy. The boy at the harbor died around then, Danielle said softly. If the transfer was meant to cover something, the timing matters. Ruth Ann set her cup down with care. I don't have a badge, she said. But I've got 2 sons and a mortgage and a way of knowing when I'm being used to wallpaper a wall that shouldn't be there. If a subpoena comes, I'll tell the truth. You just did, Danielle said. They thanked her and stepped back into the lobby. The manager's door stayed shut. A man in a ball cap filled out a deposit slip at the counter, his tongue peeking out in concentration. Ordinary life, wrapped around the seam of something not ordinary at all. At the door, Maya paused. We do this by the book, she said. I'll file for records this afternoon. We need to keep Ruth Ann out of the spotlight. They crossed to the sidewalk. The lake wind had picked up, tugging at their sleeves. Danielle spotted a sedan idling across the street, windows tinted. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was the same nothing that circled last night. Maya followed her gaze. We'll have patrol cars sweep your block, she said. Tonight I want you to stay at a different address. My father. Brooks is arranging a rotation, Maya said. He'll sit with your dad this evening under the excuse of football and bad takeout. We don't move your father unless we have to. We just make sure the house doesn't look easy. Danielle let out the breath she'd been holding since morning. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Maya said. There's another piece. The Harbor Renewal Initiative filed its incorporation with the Secretary of State under a registered agent who also handles contracts for a private security firm tied to city events. We find the person behind that agent. We find the hand on the wallet. Whitman's Circle. Maya didn't answer. She didn't have to. They split at the corner, Maya back to the Justice Center, Danielle to records for another round of paper that pretended not to know anything. On her desk, a new stack waited, and under it, a single envelope with no name. Her pulse skipped. She slid it open with a pen cap. Inside was a photocopy of a maintenance work order for the Justice Center duct cleaning on the 4th floor, done the week before by a contractor who wasn't on the approved vendor list. Someone had written in block letters along the margin, "Not all bugs live outside." She folded the paper and tucked it into her notebook. Bugs. As in microphones. As in conversations that didn't stay in the room. She looked up. The records floor hummed. An officer laughed down the hall, the sound normal as noon. Brooks appeared in her doorway as if summoned. You free at 6? He asked. Depends. Why? Because I'm bringing your dad a pizza he can complain about, he said. And I've got a story to tell you about a time a good man waited too long to move. 6, she said. Thank you. He tipped 2 fingers from his brow. Don't thank me. I like bad pizza. That night, the 3 of them sat in the living room, Danielle, her father, Brooks, while a ball game mumbled on the television. Her father ate 1 slice and declared it inferior to every pizza ever made. Brooks agreed solemnly, as if mediating a civic dispute. When her father nodded off, Brooks lowered his voice. Back when I was a younger fool, he said, we found a skimming scheme in the property room. It was small by the time we saw it. That's because it used to be big. The men who built it wore good suits and borrowed church basements for their announcements. We had one shot to stop it. We hesitated. We told ourselves more proof would be safer. By the time we had it, the trail was ashes. He looked at her. You cannot move rashly, but you also cannot let fear dress up as patience. Danielle listened. The apartment was warm, the kind of warmth that comes from old wiring and a furnace that lives by habit. Outside, the city's hum softened. She thought of Ruth Ann, of a routing number off by a digit, of a bank account with a paintbrush name, of ducks that might have been swept clean of dust and replaced with ears. She thought of the 4 words in her pocket. Stop, or he suffers. She reached across the table and set her hand over Brooks's, a grateful, steady weight. Tomorrow, she said, we start knocking on the right doors. And the wrong ones? Brooks asked. We make sure they know we're coming, she said. Her father stirred in his chair and murmured something about lunch pails and shifts changed. Danielle rose and pulled a blanket up over his knees. The old radio in the kitchen gave a soft hiss and found a station where a woman sang about promises that last longer than weather. Danielle stood by the window and looked out at the street. No black sedan, no watcher in a doorway, just lamplight and a neighbor's dog, and the ordinary night that brave people work hard to keep ordinary. Tomorrow would be for subpoenas and signatures and walking hallways where the air carried secrets. Tonight, in a small apartment with a man she loved, and a friend who refused to be done with the job, she let the quiet lay a hand on her shoulder and tell her she still had her feet under her. The match had been found. The fuse waited, and in the spaces between the ticking seconds, the city listened for the first spark. Morning found Danielle at the kitchen table, spreading butter on toast so thin the knife almost sang against the bread. Her father folded the newspaper without reading it, hands working on habit alone. He tapped the headline with one finger as if it might talk back. You working today? He asked. I am, she said. Light duty. Light gets heavy if you carry it long enough, he murmured, and went back to tracing the weather map with his thumb. By 9, she was at the Justice Center with a cup of coffee that tasted like the color gray. Maya texted, Judge signed, meet me at 11, subpoenas for Harbor Trust and Harbor Renewal. Danielle felt a small, clean current move through her. Paper that mattered, paper with teeth. The clerk's office smelled of toner and determination. Maya handed Danielle a copy of each subpoena. At the bottom, the judge's signature looked like a tight knot. Service today, Maya said. We go in person. We smile. We don't blink. They walked to Harbor Trust under a sky the color of pewter. Inside, the same lemon cleaner, the same bowl of mints like glass beads. Ruth Ann saw them and lifted her chin the tiniest bit, courage shaped like a nod. The manager, a man in a perfect tie and a perfect frown, appeared from his office when Maya presented the papers. He read too slowly, as if time could blunt ink. We'll comply, he said finally, but it will take time. Of course, Maya said. We'll wait. A pair of employees wheeled out gray banker's boxes, their labels neat, their contents heavier than they looked. Ruth Ann hovered just close enough to hand over a stapler with a smile that knew this was more than office supplies. Danielle met her eye and mouthed thank you. Ruth Ann's answer lived in the soft set of her jaw. Do something good with it. Outside, the wind off the lake tugged at their sleeves. They loaded the boxes into Maya's car and headed to a small law office where the registered agent for Harbor Renewal kept his name on the door and his conscience somewhere else. The agent accepted the subpoena with an agreeable shrug. Men like him had a way of staying dry in weather that soaked everyone else. Back at the Justice Center, they staged the boxes in a conference room with no windows and too much hum. Maya's team set up scanners, the machines eating paper in careful gulps. Danielle lifted a lid and stared down at the quiet history of money in a stack of deposit slips. There it was. Small, regular contributions from city, community events, each payment tidy and bland. Then, suddenly, a larger withdrawal, gone to a clearing account that wore a name as forgettable as beige paint. Follow the outflows, Maya said, tapping a ledger line with a capped pen. See where the larger amounts land. Danielle traced a date with her finger. Here, she said. What month did the boy die? Maya's eyes narrowed. Same week, she said. Different day, different hour, same shadow. She wrote a note. We'll need a court order for the clearing account. They worked quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't empty but purposeful. Now and then the door opened. Brooks brought coffee that tasted like hope mixed with gasoline. He stood at the threshold, eyes soft on Danielle, then drifted away as if guarding a perimeter no one else could see. Near noon, Elliot texted, "Heard you rang the bell at the bank. Lunch on me if you want a side of questions." Danielle typed back, "Later." She added, "Be careful." Dots appeared, vanished, appeared again, then nothing. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and turned another page. By mid-afternoon they had a map. Harbor renewal as intake pipe, clearing account as tunnel, event security services as the door out. The vendor names were familiar in the way shadows are familiar, you know them without ever having seen their faces. One company showed up again and again, Tri-County Protective Services. Danielle remembered the maintenance order photocopy about duct cleaning done by an unapproved contractor. Different name, same address. "Not all bugs live outside," she said aloud, and Maya looked up sharply. Danielle slid the photocopy across the table. "If they're listening inside the building, they're listening to us." Maya's gaze went to the ceiling tiles, then to the vents. She didn't smile, didn't swear. She simply wrote, "Room sweep, tonight." Then, almost to herself, "We move faster." The door opened, and the assistant chief named Klein stepped in without knocking. He glanced at the boxes and gave a dry little laugh that had no mirth in it. "Planning a bonfire?" he asked. "Planning to read," Maya said. "You're welcome to join the part where eyes stay on paper." Klein's smile didn't travel. "Command would like a status update for the 4 o'clock briefing," he said. "Something the city can digest." "The city can digest the truth," Danielle said before she could stop herself. His gaze flicked to her. "Careful, officer, you're still assigned to records." "On loan," Maya said, "to the truth." Klein left without answering. The room felt lighter by a fraction when the door clicked. They scanned until the machines grew warm. At 3, Brooks slipped in and set a small paper bag on the table. "I brought you both the worst turkey sandwiches in the city," he said. "You'll thank me when you're 60. Danielle took a bite. It tasted like dry bread and the relief of food. "How's my father?" she asked. "Playing checkers with a patrolman who thinks he's subtle," Brooks said. "Your dad just triple-jumped him without mercy. He's fine." The words landed like water on hot stone. For a moment, Danielle let herself feel the gift of them. When the scan of a thick binder finally spat out its last page, Maya leaned back and rubbed her eyes. "We have enough to crack the clearing account," she said. "We move before anyone decides to move us." Danielle nodded. Outside the conference room, afternoon thinned toward evening. Somewhere, a phone rang and stopped. Somewhere, a laugh rose and broke. In the vent, air whispered. She picked up a page and found her own breath on it, the shape of a city's habit, the line where money turned and disappeared. It would not vanish this time. She set the page down and looked at Maya, at Brooks in the doorway, at the boxes full of someone else's secrecy. "Let's go knock," she said, and the day, heavy as it was, shifted a hair toward right. The night air in Cleveland was thick, the kind that carried the smell of lake water and diesel in equal measure. Danielle stood on her balcony, long after her father had gone to bed, watching headlights snake down the avenue. She couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, in one of those cars, someone was watching back. The photograph from 2 nights ago, the threat was still hidden in her freezer, but it lived sharper in her mind than ice could dull. By morning, the city looked ordinary again. Buses hissed at stops, kids with backpacks shuffled toward school, and people stood in line for coffee as if the world had never shifted. But inside the Justice Center, the walls felt tighter. Maya had called early. "Judge approved access to the clearing account. Meet me at 9. The conference room buzzed with the sound of scanners and printers. Boxes of bank records crowded the corners like squat sentinels. Maya spread a stack of statements across the table. Danielle sat opposite, Brooks at her shoulder like a watchful uncle. "Here," Maya said, tapping a page. "Outflows from harbor renewal hit this clearing account every 2 months. No consistent payees, but look closer, same vendor code keeps surfacing." Danielle leaned in. "Tri-County Protective Services." Brooks let out a low whistle. "That outfit's been pulling city event contracts for years. Fireworks shows, parades, even the mayor's re-election rally. Always said they were overpriced, but nobody argued. Maya added, "Guess who signed most of those approvals?" She slid another sheet forward. The signature at the bottom was neat, practiced Harold Whitman. Silence fell. Danielle felt it like a weight pressing against her ribs. So the chief greenlit his own shell company? Not directly, Maya said. That's the point of a clearing account. It launders the trail. But Tri-County ties back to an address that also houses Harbor Renewal's registered agent. The circle closes. Brooks scratched his chin. That address is a warehouse on East 19th. Looks abandoned, but the lights burn late. Then that's where the paper ends, Maya said. We need eyes on it. You mean surveillance, Danielle said. Unofficially, Maya corrected. Official channels take weeks. By then, those boxes will be ashes. Brooks gave her a look heavy with warning. You know what you're saying. I do, Maya replied. And I know who I'm saying it to. Her eyes moved to Danielle. You want to see where your fight leads? Tonight's your chance. Danielle's throat tightened. She thought of her father at home, his blanket tucked around his knees, the photo in her freezer, the whispered text. Be careful who you trust inside. Still, she heard herself say, I'll go. Dusk fell hard over the industrial district. Warehouses loomed like sleeping giants, their windows black, their bricks scarred. Danielle sat in the passenger seat of Brooks's car, binoculars warm in her hands. Maya was in the back with a camera fitted with a long lens, its shutter silenced with tape. Across the street, the warehouse looked as lifeless as the others, except for the faint glow spilling through a high window and the occasional shadow crossing it. Second floor, Maya whispered. They're working. For an hour, they watched. A van pulled up, men in plain clothes unloading file boxes. No logos, no chatter. One man kept glancing over his shoulder as if even the night might tell on him. Inside, figures moved past the window, stacking boxes against the wall, then feeding some into a shredder whose hum carried faintly through the alley. Danielle gripped the binoculars tighter. They're destroying records, Brooks muttered. And we're sitting here watching. Oh, we need proof, Maya said. She snapped photos each time a box was lifted, each time shredded confetti spilled from a bag. Her voice was calm, but Danielle saw her knuckles white on the camera. Near midnight, the van pulled away. The lights inside the warehouse dimmed, leaving only the street lamp's orange glow. The district fell quiet again, as though the night itself had swallowed what they'd seen. Danielle lowered the binoculars. How long before they burn the rest? Not long, Maya said. She packed the camera carefully. But tonight we have faces, timestamps, vehicles, enough to push a judge for a warrant. And Whitman? Brooks asked. Maya's eyes were hard. He'll know we're close, which means he'll push back harder. Danielle looked once more at the warehouse, at the walls hiding the bones of truth. Somewhere inside, paper had turned to ash, but not all of it. Not yet. She whispered to herself, steady as a prayer. We'll get there before the fire. The warrant came faster than anyone expected. By mid-morning, Maya held the signed order in her hand, the seal crisp against the paper. She allowed herself one breath of relief before sliding it into a folder. We move tonight, she told Danielle and Brooks, before they torch the rest. That day dragged like a bad dream. Danielle pushed files and records, but her mind stayed locked on the warehouse. She kept picturing the men feeding boxes into the shredder, their movements efficient, practiced. She wondered how many years of lies could vanish in a single evening of smoke and confetti. When her phone buzzed, it was Elliot. Heard about the warrant. Don't shut me out, Carter. The city deserves the story, as much as the courtroom. She didn't answer. Some battles couldn't afford headlines yet. Night fell with a restless wind. The team assembled near the docks, Maya, 2 agents from Internal Affairs, Brooks in plain clothes, and Danielle wearing the same boots she'd had since the academy. They waited in unmarked cars, watching the warehouse through cracked windows. At 9 sharp, Maya gave the signal. They crossed the street in silence, boots crunching gravel. The roll-up door groaned under the agent's pry bar. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the sour tang of burnt paper. Rows of boxes lined the walls, some half empty, others sealed with fresh tape. A shredder sat in the corner, its bin overflowing with curled strips. Danielle's stomach tightened at the sight. It felt like standing in a graveyard where the dead had been torn to ribbons. Bag everything, Maya ordered. The agents moved quickly, snapping photos, labeling evidence, loading what they could into crates. Brooks wandered to a desk, shoved against the far wall. "Looks like someone left in a hurry," he said, lifting a ledger with one bent corner. "No time to shred this one." Danielle flipped through it, her pulse quickening. Payments flowed neatly across the columns, coded to contracts for event security. Each deposit matched a withdrawal from Harbor Renewal's clearing account, and scrawled in the margin of one page was a note. "Approval pending HW." Whitman's initials. The sound of a car engine cut through the silence. Headlights swept across the high windows. Danielle froze, the ledger still in her hands. "They're back," Brooks whispered. Maya snapped her fingers. "Everyone out, now." They shoved evidence into bags, but the roll-up door rattled before they reached it. Voices echoed outside, men shouting to each other. One kicked the door, metal ringing like a drum. "Back way," Brooks hissed. He led them toward a narrow staircase at the rear. They slipped down a corridor that smelled of oil and mildew, emerging into an alley choked with weeds. The night air slapped Danielle's face, cold and urgent. Behind them, the warehouse door screeched open. Flashlights darted across the floor. One beam caught the shredded pile, another the space where boxes had stood. A voice cursed loud enough to carry into the street. The team pressed against the brick wall, hearts hammering. Danielle clutched the ledger to her chest, its pages hot with significance. Maya leaned close, her whisper sharp. "That book is enough to tie him in knots. Protect it with your life." They crept along the alley until the noise behind them dulled. Brooks hailed their car with a sharp whistle, and they piled inside. The driver hit the gas, tires spitting gravel as they sped back toward downtown. Only when the warehouse was a memory in the rear view did anyone speak. "They know someone's inside now," Brooks said. "They'll assume thieves," Maya countered. "Not yet, internal affairs. Not yet." Danielle stared at the ledger in her lap. The initials glared back at her, black ink on tired paper. For the first time, the chief's shadow had weight she could hold. Proof, not whispers. "Tonight we turned sparks into fire," Maya said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes betrayed the storm brewing inside. "The question is how long we can keep the blaze alive before someone throws water on it." Danielle thought of her father, asleep in his chair under a thin blanket. She thought of the boy at the harbor, of Ruth Ann at her teller window, of every officer who had looked away in the courtyard that morning. She closed the ledger gently and whispered, almost to herself, "Then we don't give them time to reach the water." The warrant came faster than anyone expected. By mid-morning, Maya held the signed order in her hand, the seal crisp against the paper. She allowed herself one breath of relief before sliding it into a folder. "We move tonight," she told Danielle and Brooks, before they torched the rest. That day dragged like a bad dream. Danielle pushed files and records, but her mind stayed locked on the warehouse. She kept picturing the men feeding boxes into the shredder, their movements efficient, practiced. She wondered how many years of lies could vanish in a single evening of smoke and confetti. When her phone buzzed, it was Elliot. "Heard about the warrant." "Don't shut me out, Carter. The city deserves the story as much as the courtroom." She didn't answer. Some battles couldn't afford headlines yet. Night fell with a restless wind. The team assembled near the docks. Maya, 2 agents from Internal Affairs, Brooks in plain clothes, and Danielle wearing the same boots she'd had since the academy. They waited in unmarked cars, watching the warehouse through cracked windows. At 9 sharp, Maya gave the signal. They crossed the street in silence, boots crunching gravel. The roll-up door groaned under the agent's pry bar. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the sour tang of burnt paper. Rows of boxes lined the walls, some half empty, others sealed with fresh tape. A shredder sat in the corner, its bin overflowing with curled strips. Danielle's stomach tightened at the sight. It felt like standing in a graveyard where the dead had been torn to ribbons. "Bag everything," Maya ordered. The agents moved quickly, snapping photos, labeling evidence, loading what they could into crates. Brooks wandered to a desk, shoved against the far wall. "Looks like someone left in a hurry," he said, lifting a ledger with one bent corner. "No time to shred this one." Danielle flipped through it, her pulse quickening. Payments flowed neatly across the columns, coded to contracts for event security. Each deposit matched a withdrawal from Harbor Renewal's clearing account, and scrawled in the margin of one page was a note. Approval pending HW. Whitman's initials. The sound of a car engine cut through the silence. Headlights swept across the high windows. Danielle froze, the ledger still in her hands. "They're back," Brooks whispered. Maya snapped her fingers. "Everyone out, now." They shoved evidence into bags, but the roll-up door rattled before they reached it. Voices echoed outside, men shouting to each other. One kicked the door, metal ringing like a drum. "Back way," Brooks hissed. He led them toward a narrow staircase at the rear. They slipped down a corridor that smelled of oil and mildew, emerging into an alley choked with weeds. The night air slapped Danielle's face, cold and urgent. Behind them, the warehouse door screeched open. Flashlights darted across the floor. One beam caught the shredded pile, another the space where boxes had stood. A voice cursed loud enough to carry into the street. The team pressed against the brick wall, hearts hammering. Danielle clutched the ledger to her chest, its pages hot with significance. Maya leaned close, her whisper sharp. "That book is enough to tie him in knots. Protect it with your life." They crept along the alley until the noise behind them dulled. Brooks hailed their car with a sharp whistle, and they piled inside. The driver hit the gas, tires spitting gravel as they sped back toward downtown. Only when the warehouse was a memory in the rear view did anyone speak. "They know someone's inside now," Brooks said. "They'll assume thieves," Maya countered. "Not yet internal affairs. Not yet." Danielle stared at the ledger in her lap. The initials glared back at her, black ink on tired paper. For the first time, the chief's shadow had weight she could hold. Proof, not whispers. "Tonight we turned sparks into fire," Maya said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes betrayed the storm brewing inside. "The question is how long we can keep the blaze alive before someone throws water on it." Danielle thought of her father, asleep in his chair under a thin blanket. She thought of the boy at the harbor, of Ruth Ann at her teller window, of every officer who had looked away in the courtyard that morning. She closed the ledger gently and whispered, almost to herself, "Then we don't give them time to reach the water." Oh. The federal building in downtown Cleveland had the look of a place that had seen too many storms and learned not to flinch. Its stone walls were scarred but steady, its steps worn smooth by decades of feet carrying secrets up and verdicts down. Danielle Carter climbed those steps just after dawn, flanked by Maya Alvarez and Raymond Brooks. In her hand, she carried a folder of sworn statements. In her chest, a heartbeat that would not slow. Inside, the air smelled faintly of wax and paper. They were met by two FBI agents in suits that seemed cut from the same cloth, dark, precise, impersonal. One introduced himself as Special Agent Coleman. He shook Danielle's hand, firm but not warm. "We appreciate your cooperation," he said. "But understand, once we open this, it won't close quietly." "That's the point," Danielle replied. They were led to a windowless room, all white walls and fluorescent hum. On the table lay a fresh tape recorder, its red light ready to blink. Danielle sat, her hands flat on the wood. She gave her name, badge number, and oath. Then she told the story again, how she had followed the trail of the Harbor Renewal Initiative, how the clearing account funneled into Tri-County Protective Services, how Chief Whitman's initials were stamped across approvals like fingerprints on glass. She described the boy at the harbor, the transfers that coincided with his death, the envelope slipped under her door with threats that curled like smoke. Coleman listened, expressionless, jotting notes with a pen that never slowed. When she finished, he clicked the recorder off. "We'll corroborate," he said. "You've given us enough to open a joint investigation with Treasury." He looked at Maya. "Chain of custody on the ledger?" "Intact," Maya answered. "Photographed, logged, secured." Coleman nodded. "Then we'll move fast. But Officer Carter, be prepared. They'll come for you first. They'll want to crack the witness before the case." Danielle thought of her father at home, dozing in his chair, asking after a lunch pail that hadn't existed in years. She straightened. Let them try. By midday, word had leaked that the FBI was sniffing around the Justice Center. It came as whispers in the hallways, sharp glances over coffee cups, sudden silences when Danielle entered a room. Some officers looked at her with admiration, others with cold resentment, a few muttered words like traitor under their breath. Brooks walked with her through the corridors, his broad frame a barrier. "Fault lines," he murmured. "Every department's got them. You just made ours visible." Um, at lunch, Danielle sat alone in the cafeteria until Ruth Ann Calloway appeared, her cardigan buttoned wrong in her rush. I shouldn't be here, she whispered, sliding into the seat. But I wanted you to know I got a call this morning. Manager told me not to come in for a week. Said the system was being updated, but he looked scared. Whatever you rattled, it's shaking in the bank too. Danielle touched her hand. Hold steady, Ruth Ann. You're not alone. Ruth Ann nodded, her lips tight with fear and resolve, then slipped away as quietly as she'd come. That evening, Danielle returned home to find Brooks already on her porch with 2 pizzas and a deck of cards. Federal protection detail won't start till tomorrow, he said. So tonight you've got me. Inside, her father greeted him warmly, calling him Ray, as if they were old Union buddies. They ate at the kitchen table, laughter rising here and there like small islands in rough water. For a while, it felt almost normal until Danielle's phone buzzed. A message. No number. Just a photo of her father at the window, taken from the street below. Her hand went cold. Brooks read over her shoulder, his jaw tightening. They're done with hints, he said. Danielle looked at her father, who was happily humming to himself, unaware. Then we move faster, she said. The next morning, the FBI raided the East 19th warehouse. Trucks rolled up before dawn, agents swarming through the doors. What they found was predictable. Shredded paper, scorched bins, a handful of boxes too heavy to have been carried off overnight. But inside those boxes were contracts, security details for parades, concerts, even city hall meetings, all signed under Whitman's oversight, all paid through Tri-County. By noon, the news broke. Local stations carried footage of agents carting evidence into vans. The city buzzed. Elliot Barnes called Danielle 3 times, left messages full of urgency. I need your voice on record. Don't let them spin this before you do. Maya warned her to stay silent for now. Let the investigation speak. The chief will try to paint you as a rogue officer. If you feed the press too soon, you'll play into his hands. But Danielle wasn't sure. Silence could be twisted too. She thought of Elliot's words, make the truth louder than the smear. That evening, Whitman himself stepped before cameras at City Hall. Danielle watched on television from her apartment, her father dozing beside her. The chief's hair gleamed under the lights, his voice calm, commanding. These baseless accusations are an attack not just on me, but on the men and women who risk their lives daily, he said. Yes, I signed contracts for Tri-County Protective Services. They were approved vendors, vetted like any other. To suggest otherwise is slander. This city deserves better than officers who grandstand in courtyards and undermine their own department. Danielle's stomach twisted. He never spoke her name, but every syllable pointed at her. Then came the line that made her blood run cold. And let me be clear, anyone using personal struggles or family tragedies to shield their misconduct is unfit for this badge. Oh, her father stirred in his chair, murmuring something about the mill, unaware that the most powerful man in the department had just dangled his illness as a weapon. Danielle muted the television, her hands trembling. He won't stop, she whispered. He'll grind me down until nothing's left. Brooks set a hand on her shoulder. Then you dig in deeper. He's playing fear. You play truth. She looked at him, at her father, at the city skyline beyond the window. Somewhere in those lights, deals were being struck, threats whispered, power shifting like sand. But she had a ledger, she had allies, and she had the courage to keep stepping forward. Tomorrow, the fight would sharpen. The FBI would dig deeper. Whitman would tighten his grip. The city would choose who to believe. For now, Danielle whispered the only promise she could keep. I won't let him write the ending. Hi. By dawn, Cleveland felt like a church before a storm quiet, pews straight, everyone pretending the thunder wasn't already on the porch. Danielle woke to the smell of coffee and the soft scrape of her father's slippers in the kitchen. He had set 2 mugs and 3 slices of toast on the table, with a pride that made her throat ache. Shift starts early, he said, nodding at the window as if the sun were a foreman. It does, she said, kissing his cheek. She glanced at the freezer, at the envelope buried under the tray. The threat hadn't melted with the ice. It never would. We'll play checkers tonight. You always forget to keep your king out of trouble, he said, smiling the boy's smile that time hadn't stolen. She carried that smile with her into the Justice Center, past sideways looks and longer stares. In internal affairs, the air had a new tension, a wire drawn tight between two hands that refused to let go. Maya was already at the board, markers bleeding a spiderweb of lines: harbor renewal, Tri-County Protective Services, the warehouse, the ledger, the dates that rhymed too neatly with the boy by the harbor. Coleman called. Maya said without turning, "FBI wants sworn affidavits from Ruth Ann and from you on the warehouse seizure. They're drafting preliminary charges. But we have another problem." She uncapped a red marker and wrote a single word: leak. Brooks, leaning in the doorway with a coffee that could have stripped paint, grunted. Klein. "Maybe," Maya said. "Maybe someone under him. Either way, the warehouse was nearly scrubbed before we got there. Someone with a badge is calling plays." Danielle felt the tired anger rise, the kind that gives you two choices: sit with it or stand on it. "Then we feed the leak something we can track." Maya looked over, eyes narrowing with a kind of approval that didn't come with a smile. "Go on." We plant a detail," Danielle said, thinking out loud. "Something true-ish, harmless on its own. We tell exactly 3 people in a room we can control. When it surfaces on the wrong side, we know where the whole island." Brooks nodded slowly. "Old trick. Still works when a department forgets it once knew how to be honest." Maya took a breath, mind already moving. "We'll stage a briefing. Klein, O'Reilly, and Whitman's aide Martin. We say we've recovered a thumb drive that mirrors the ledger. We haven't. But the story will crawl to whoever has been tipping the other team." "Then what?" Danielle asked. "Then," Maya said, "we follow the story to a door and knock it down." They set the room before lunch, a plain conference space with a clock that ran a minute fast and vents that hummed. In the corner, a service tech from Facilities Tony, who'd fixed more broken chairs than any man should pretended to swap a thermostat. Out of his toolbox came a small device that chirped when it found company. He swept the room once, twice, a third time, professional and patient. 2 bugs, both new, hid in the ceiling tiles like shy spiders. He lifted them down with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Not all bugs live outside," he said softly, and Danielle knew he'd heard the same rumor they had. Maya placed the bugs in an evidence bag, labeled and dated with the tidy handwriting of a woman who didn't plan to lose a single inch to sloppiness. "Let's invite our guests." Klein arrived with a look that made courtesy feel like an inconvenience. O'Reilly followed, drumming fingers on his folder. Martin, Whitman's aide, slid in last, young, immaculate, his tie knotted with the exactness of a man who watched videos about such things. Maya spoke plainly. "We've secured additional digital evidence that supports the ledger recovered from East 19th. For chain of custody, we aren't disclosing specifics until the federal team logs it. We expect movement within 48 hours. Klein's eyebrows lifted. "Digital evidence?" "Thumb drive," Maya said, casual as a grocery list. "Encrypted. Mirrored records." Martin's eyes flicked once to the door, then back. It was a small movement. It was enough. When they left, Brooks exhaled. "My money's on the tie," he said. "Mine too," Maya murmured. Now we wait. Waiting, as it turned out, didn't take long. At 3:30, Coleman called from the bureau. "We just had a fire alarm at our evidence annex. False trigger, likely a probe. Also, a quiet query hit Treasury's servers from a spoofed municipal IP asking about decryption protocols for seized media. Your thumb drive rumor has legs." Maya's eyes hardened. "Thank you, Agent, we're on it." They traced the spoof through the city network to a public works hub 2 floors below. Danielle and Brooks took the stairs, Maya on their heels. The hub looked like any municipal office cubicles, potted plants, a calendar with a bald eagle. At a workstation near the back, a screen showed a network diagnostics console open over a browser pointed at a government forum only insiders used. The chair was empty. "Passwords," Brooks said to the room. Now, he didn't raise his voice, but men and women who fixed pipes and cleaned streets reached for their pocket notebooks like churchgoers reaching for hymnals. It wasn't fear so much as sense. There are moments when you give the badge what it asks, so the city keeps its shape. Maya traced the login to a user ID assigned to Martin. He'd authenticated from upstairs. He'd routed through here. 2 doors down, the elevator chimed. They moved as one. In the hall, Martin stepped out with the calm of a man who had rehearsed this scene in his head, denials ready, face smoothed. He didn't see Brooks until the older man's hand closed on his elbow with the gentleness of a vice. "Walk," Brooks said. In Maya's office, the facade didn't last. The first crack came not from threat, but from the precise recitation of facts Maya laid out like cards: the bugs in the ceiling, the spoofed query, the timing of the false alarm, the way Martin had borrowed a facilities badge last week to get a light replaced. She asked one question. Why? She didn't ask it like an accusation. She asked it like a woman looking for the reason a decent city forgets itself. Martin's jaw worked. "Because I was told to," he said at last. "By whom?" Maya asked. He swallowed. "It started as favors, then as orders. The chief likes knowing what's coming." Danielle studied him. He looked young again, younger than his tie, younger than his shoes. "And you like keeping your job?" she said softly. He lifted his eyes to hers. There was a flicker of shame there, and something else, relief. "I'm not the only one," he said. "Tri-County has a house list. Donations, errands, contractors who look the other way. I sent updates. That's all." That's enough," Brooks said. Coleman took Martin from them inside the hour, federal custody moving faster than city politics ever did. In his statement, Martin gave them a pattern late-night calls routed through a private exchange, documents swapped at drop points with names like CityWorks Storage B, a quiet fund that paid for loyalty with gift cards and consulting fees. Names spilled, not in a flood, but in a steady rain that made a map on the floor. By dusk, the map led to a small office above a pawn shop on Street Clare, the place where Tri-County's community liaison kept 2 file cabinets and a calendar with a dog in a firefighter's hat. Danielle went with the team, not because she needed to be there, but because there are moments you owe witnesses your eyes. What they found made even Brooks whistle low copies of contracts, a handwritten memo that read, "HW wants this clean," envelopes with cash slips and initials that told the story the ledger had started. On the sidewalk, the lake wind cut cold. Maya zipped her jacket and looked at Danielle. "We're within a hand's breadth," she said. "Tomorrow the warrants widen. Whitman's home, his office, the city server room. We're going to pull this up by the roots." Danielle nodded. It should have felt triumphant. It felt like standing on a trap door and hoping the hinges held. "Elliot's going to know," Brooks said quietly. "The raids won't stay quiet. You hide, they write you. You speak, you own your voice." Danielle heard her father's voice in memory. "Don't let them make you forget it." She took out her phone and typed a message to Elliot. 10 minutes. Back alley behind Street Clare Pawn. No camera crew. 1 recorder. No questions about my father. He answered in seconds. "I'll come alone." They met by a dumpster that smelled like metal and rain. Elliot's coat was too thin for the wind, but his eyes were clear. He held out the recorder. She watched him click it on. "You'll print my words as I say them," Danielle said. "No color, no brave cop headline, no sad daughter angle." "Yes," he said. "Full context." She told the city what it needed to hear, not the details that would compromise charges, not the gossip that would feed the wolves, but the spine of it. That money meant for parades and community days had walked into a dark room and come out with a different name, that a ledger could weigh more than a gun, that she had put herself in the path of a car because the road behind her had closed. She said the boy's name, first and last, steady, as if speaking it could lay a stone in the city's foundation. When she finished, Elliot didn't speak. The recorder's red eye burned in the dusk. He clicked it off. "Thank you," he said simply. "I'll protect what needs protecting." "See that you do," Brooks said from the shadows. That night, Danielle returned home with takeout soup and crackers. Her father sat by the window, watching the streetlight paint a gold circle on the sidewalk. "Your mother used to say the city sleeps like a dog," he offered. Ears open. "She was right," Danielle said, hanging her coat. She set the soup on the table and tucked his blanket tighter. "We'll eat and then call it a night." The phone rang once. Twice, she answered. A line clicked. Then a voice she knew too well spoke without warmth or surprise. "You've made a mess, Officer Carter," Harold Whitman said. "But messes can be cleaned." Her skin prickled. "Then you know what a broom looks like." "I do," he said. "I also know where the dirt piles. Remember that. Tonight, go to bed. Tomorrow will be loud." He hung up. Danielle stared at the receiver a moment longer, and then set it down, careful as if it might break. She looked at her father, who met her eyes with a clarity that came and went like radio signal. "Hard day?" he asked. "Hard day," she said. He nodded. "You did work worth doing?" "I did." "Then let the dog sleep," he said, a smile tugging. "Ears open." She laughed, the sound small and honest. She sat with him, spooned soup, listened to the city hum. Somewhere, men in suits were dialing numbers that would not save them tomorrow. Somewhere, a teller named Ruth Ann was saying her prayers with her hands folded tight. Somewhere, a warehouse that had thought itself empty now held the echo of federal boots. The trapdoor was set. The hinges were tested. In the morning, Cleveland would learn whether it opened under the man who had believed his feet were too important to fall. By dawn, Cleveland felt hushed, as if the city itself braced for thunder. Danielle left her father at the kitchen table with coffee and toast, carrying his boyish smile with her into the Justice Center. Inside Internal Affairs, Maya Alvarez had drawn a web of names and shell companies on the board. "We've got proof," she said, "but we also have a leak. 2 bugs had been found in their ceiling the night before. Someone inside was feeding Whitman's circle." Danielle suggested bait. "We float a detail only 3 people here. When it surfaces, we'll know who to watch." Maya agreed. They staged a briefing with Klein, O'Reilly, and Martin, Whitman's aide. Calmly, Maya announced they had seized a thumb drive mirroring the ledger. Danielle saw Martin's eyes flick to the door. By afternoon, the FBI called. "Someone probed Treasury servers for decryption protocols," Coleman said. "From a municipal IP, your story has legs." The trail led straight to Martin. Confronted, he broke faster than expected. "I just sent updates," he admitted. "Tri-County has a list: donations, errands, officers who look away. The chief likes knowing what's coming." Under federal custody, Martin gave up drop points and paper trails. One led to an office above a pawn shop on Street Clare. Danielle joined the raid and watched agents pull contracts, cash slips, even a note reading. "HW wants this clean." Outside, the lake wind was sharp. Maya zipped her jacket. "Tomorrow we raid Whitman's office and home. We pull this up by the roots." Hi. It should have felt like victory. To Danielle, it felt like standing on a trap door. That evening, she called Elliot Barnes, the reporter. "One recorder," she warned. "No questions about my father." In the alley behind the pawn shop, she told him the spine of the story. City funds stolen under false names, a ledger that weighed more than a gun, the boy at the harbor whose death had been buried in silence. Elliot clicked the recorder off. "I'll print it clean," he promised. At home, Danielle shared soup with her father. He watched the streetlight glow on the sidewalk. "Your mother said the city sleeps like a dog," he murmured. Ears open. The phone rang. A familiar voice filled the line. "You've made a mess, Officer Carter," Chief Whitman said. "But messes can be cleaned. Tonight, go to bed. Tomorrow will be loud." The line went dead. Danielle stared at the receiver, then at her father. He met her eyes with rare clarity. "Hard day?" he asked. "Hard day," she admitted. "You did work worth doing?" "I did." He smiled faintly. "Then let the dog sleep. Ears open." Danielle laughed softly. Outside, the city hummed. Tomorrow, the trapdoor would open, and this time not under her feet. Morning broke with the sound of sirens not chasing suspects, but announcing raids. Federal agents moved through Cleveland like a tide, knocking on doors that once seemed untouchable. They swept Whitman's office, his lakefront home, and the city server room. Boxes of files, hard drives, even framed photographs were carried into waiting vans. Cameras followed, reporters shouted questions, and the city finally saw what had been whispered for years: power could bleed. Danielle stood at the edge of the Justice Center courtyard, the same place where she had once stepped in front of the chief's SUV. Now, she watched agents march through the doors he used to own. Beside her, Maya kept her arms folded tight, jaw set, while Brooks leaned on his cane with something like weary pride. Across the street, Elliot Barnes raised his camera, catching the moment. He met Danielle's eyes and gave a small nod. She had given him the story. Now the city was listening. By noon, Whitman appeared in public, flanked by his lawyer. His tie was still neat, his voice still smooth, but the cameras caught the tremor in his hand. He called the raids political theater, dismissed the ledger as fabricated, and accused certain officers of betrayal. But the words rang thin against the sight of boxes marked evidence being loaded into vans. When the press conference ended, Danielle's phone buzzed. A message from Ruth Ann Calloway. They pulled our branch records too. I told them everything. No more silence. Danielle smiled faintly. The trap door had opened, and Whitman was the one falling. That evening, she returned home to her father. He was sitting by the window, watching the sun sink into the lake. She told him simply, "It's happening." He looked at her with a clarity that startled her. "Good," he said. "Then you keep walking. Don't stop at the door, walk all the way in." For the first time in months, Danielle let herself believe the end of this fight might not be ruin, but renewal. Tomorrow would bring indictments, hearings, headlines. But tonight, she sat beside her father in the fading light, listening to the city breathe, knowing justice had finally found its footing. The city did not change overnight, but it began to breathe differently. Headlines filled the papers, indictments followed, and Chief Harold Whitman's name, once spoken with reverence, became shorthand for betrayal. Officers who had stood silent now stepped forward, their voices shaky but real. The ledger had done its work, but so had courage. On a cool evening, Danielle walked with her father by the lake. He shuffled slowly, leaning on her arm, but his eyes were clear, catching the last light on the water. "You carried it far," he said softly. "I didn't carry it alone," she replied. She thought of Maya, Brooks, Ruth Ann, even Elliot. Each had played a part, each had chosen the truth when it mattered most. They stopped at a bench. Her father sat, folding his hands in his lap. "Your mother used to say the city isn't made of buildings. It's made of people who remember what promises are for." Danielle nodded. "Then we'll keep remembering." The lake breeze stirred, cool and steady. For the first time in a long while, Danielle felt the weight on her shoulders ease. Justice had come late, scarred and tired, but it had come. And she knew Cleveland would never forget. My dear friends, if you've stayed with me until the very last moments, surely your heart has gone through a whirlwind of emotions. Surprise, anger, compassion, even a lump in your throat at the choice made by the black female police officer. What do you think about her action? Was it admirable courage or a risky recklessness? If you were in her place, what would you do? Leave your comment below. If you believe that justice must be protected by the truth, press 1. If you feel there are still mysteries left unsolved, press 0. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you, too, will always stand on the side of justice, even though the path to the truth is never easy.